At some point in your leadership career, being busy stops being a badge and starts being a problem. You can see the strategic work you need to do, and every week ends the same way. Fires, firefighting, and the quiet suspicion that you're drifting further from the leader you intended to be. You've become indispensable, but for the wrong things. And the people who matter can't see you operating at the level you're actually capable of. In this video, you'll get two things: exactly why you're stuck in reactive mode, and a concrete 90-day path out of it, with specific actions you can start this week. You start Monday with the best intentions. You've got a clear list, a couple of hours blocked for something that actually matters. By 9:30, someone needs a decision. By 11, there's a problem only you can fix. By the afternoon, your agenda has been replaced by everyone else's, and the work you actually plan to do is still sitting there, untouched. And here's what makes it worse. It's not like the days are wasted. You're busy every minute. You're solving real problems. People are coming to you because they need you. That part feels like leadership. But Friday rolls around and you sit back and ask yourself, did I actually move anything forward this week? Or did I just react to everything that came at me? That feeling has a name. It's called the reactive trap. And the more experienced you become, the more dangerous it gets. Because you get good at putting out fires. You're fast, decisive, effective. But that competence becomes the thing that keeps you stuck. Because while you're handling what's urgent, someone else is shaping what's coming. While you are responding, they're deciding. And slowly, without you noticing, you stop being someone who leads the future and start being someone who manages the present. And the gap between where you are and where you want to be gets wider, not smaller, even as you work harder. You're probably aware of this. You feel it. You just don't know how to break the pattern. Not in a way that's practical, not in the middle of a real job with real demands. I'm a professor of foresight. I teach MBAs how to lead through uncertainty. I'm also founder of the Futures Coach, where I work directly with senior leaders who are in the middle of exactly this. And the pattern I keep seeing is always the same. This isn't an intelligence problem. It's a practice problem. Reactive mode is a trap, but it's a trap you can learn to break. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how. This video is about how to get out of the trap. Not a theory, not a mindset shift, a specific 90-day path for breaking out of reactive mode and starting to lead like the person who's actually shaping what comes next. The shift happens in 3 movements. Your first week, your first month, your first quarter. None of it requires a budget, a mandate, or anyone else's permission. Week 1 changes how you see. Month 1 changes how your team thinks. Quarter 1 changes what your organization does, visibly, durably, in ways that outlast the 90 days. Let's start with week 1. It's not about telling your team you're doing things differently, because most leaders try that. New meeting structures, new norms, new commitments. It collapses within a fortnight. Your team sees a new process before you've developed a new instinct. The first crisis hits, and you revert back to normal. You've spent credibility on a change that didn't stick. And the next time you announce something, they'll wait to see if this one lasts too. Week 1 is about something different, changing how you show up, quietly, internally, before anyone else notices. Because the external change only sticks when the internal shift happens first. I want you to do 3 things this week. None of them visible to anyone else yet. All of them changing something real about how you operate. First, decide how much time you want for strategic work. Not how much you have, how much you want. Because if you don't make that decision deliberately, the decision gets made for you by your inbox, your team, and the next fire that needs putting out. Most leaders have never actually asked themselves this question. So ask it now. Write down the number. Then do a time audit. Take last week's calendar. For every meeting, every task, every hour, ask yourself 2 questions. Was this reactive or anticipatory? Was I responding to what had already happened or shaping what's coming? Was this something only I could do or something I'm doing because I've always done it? Most leaders who do this find the same thing. 80, sometimes 90% of their week sits in the reactive column. And a significant chunk of that is work that shouldn't be theirs at all. That's not a time management problem. That's the gap between the time you want for strategy and the time you're actually getting. Now you can see exactly what you're working with. Second, and this one is about your organization, not just you. Most leadership teams are so deep in the present that nobody is asking the questions that actually matter for the future. Not because they don't care, because there's always something more urgent. And slowly, without anyone deciding it, the organization stops noticing what's changing. Opportunities pass. Assumptions go untested. And one day the market has moved and you're still running the same plays you were 5 years ago. This week, you're going to start changing that. Find a colleague you trust and have one longer conversation than you normally would. Not about what's on fire, about what's changing. I'll give you 2 questions to get this conversation started. What's different about our customers compared to 2 years ago, and where is that heading? And 2, what are we still doing the same way we did 5 years ago? And should we be? Keep the conversation informal, but make space for it, because this conversation is the beginning of your organization's early warning system. Every decision you make under pressure, with no time to think, optimized for right now, is a small step away from the leader you intended to be. Not because you made the wrong call, because you never had the chance to make the right one. You were too deep in the present to see what was coming. Too busy solving today to notice that tomorrow was already shifting. And slowly, without you deciding it, you become the leader who keeps getting surprised, who builds a track record of decisions that needed reversing, who is always catching up, never ahead. The 3 signals check is a 10-minute exercise I've been using with leadership teams for years. It won't eliminate uncertainty, but it will make sure that before you make any important decision, you've looked further than the immediate pressure. And that's the difference between a decision that's right for now and one that's right for what's coming. Take the most important decision currently on your plate. Before you build the business case, before you consult your team, before you commit, ask yourself 3 questions. What's emerging in this space that you haven't yet considered? Because the world doesn't pause while you implement. And a decision that ignores what's coming is already out of date before it lands. What's declining that your strategy hasn't let go of yet? Because most strategies fail not because they aimed at the wrong future, but because they were still anchored to a past that was quietly disappearing. What feels unlikely but would change everything if it happened? Because the risks that damage organizations most are never the ones on the risk register. They're the ones nobody wanted to say out loud. 3 questions, 10 minutes. And if you answer them honestly, you will see your decision differently. Let me make this concrete with an example I see playing out in leadership teams right now. Say you're deciding whether to invest in a new technology platform, maybe an AI-powered tool that promises to automate a chunk of your team's workflow. The vendor demonstration was impressive, the business case looks reasonable, there's internal pressure to move because a competitor is already piloting something similar. But ask yourself, what's emerging in this space that you haven't yet considered? This space, particularly AI, is moving faster than your procurement cycle. There are 3 or 4 competitors to your vendor that didn't exist 18 months ago, and the capability gap between them is closing. There's also a quiet but growing conversation in your industry about data governance, where enterprise data goes when it runs through third-party AI tools. These discussions are not urgent yet, but potentially a compliance issue by the time you've finished implementing. Has your decision actually accounted for that? Or is it assuming the world stays still while you act? The second question is the uncomfortable one. What's declining that your strategy hasn't let go of yet? The workflow you're automating, how confident are you that it's still the right workflow in 3 years? Organizations routinely invest in technology that makes an existing process faster, but they don't stop to ask whether the process itself is becoming obsolete. If the platform automates how your team produces a certain output, but the value of that output is already starting to decline in your market, You haven't solved the problem. You've just made it cheaper to produce something people are starting to want less of. Decline is slow enough to ignore until it isn't. The third question is the wild card. What feels unlikely but would change everything if it happened? What if the vendor gets acquired in the next 12 months and the roadmap changes completely? What if a regulation lands that restricts how this category of tool can be used in your sector? What if the internal capability you're planning to reduce because the platform replaces it turns out to be harder to rebuild than you thought? You're not predicting any of this. You're just making sure your decision has some answer if the ground shifts. Before you go further, there's a free scorecard linked in the description and in the first comment. 4 dimensions, 2 minutes. It tells you exactly how future-ready the organization you're leading actually is. Take it before you watch the rest of this. Week 1 is about you. But here's the truth. One leader scanning for weak signals, one leader asking better questions, one leader protecting thinking time. It's not enough. Because seeing change coming isn't a solo skill. It's a team habit. And until your team develops it with you, you're the only person in the room looking up. Month 1 is where that changes. The first thing to do now is to find your allies. Every team has 1 or 2 people who are already asking questions nobody else is asking. The naturally curious ones. The ones who flag things 6 months before they become problems. You probably know exactly who I'm talking about. Find them before you do anything else. And be direct. Tell them, I'm working on shifting how this team thinks about the future. I've noticed you already think this way. I want you involved in that. You're not launching a program, you're building a coalition. Quietly, person by person, so that when the going gets hard, you're not the only one holding it. Once you have your allies, you're ready to start shifting how the whole team thinks. And the simplest way to do that is what I call the signals habit. Because without it, your team stays operationally sharp, but contextually blind. They execute well, but they keep getting surprised. And every surprise becomes another fire for you to firefight. And because every fire lands on your desk. Pick one regular team meeting and add 5 minutes at the start. You and your allies go first. Share something you've noticed. A shift in your industry. An emerging technology. A change in customer behavior. A competitor doing something unexpected. Then rotate. Each week someone new brings a signal. Keep it lightweight, no formal analysis required. This sounds small, but it isn't. Teams that do this consistently develop a kind of peripheral vision, a collective habit of noticing that most teams simply never build. 4 weeks in, you'll feel it in how your team talks. 8 weeks in, it's just how they think. The third thing for the rest of the month takes more courage. It's a conversation most leadership teams never have, not because they're avoiding it, but because nobody ever made it a habit. Every strategy is built on assumptions about the future, things that have to be true for the plan to work. And most teams write those assumptions into the plan, align behind them, and then stop questioning them. The assumptions get buried under execution, and slowly, without anyone deciding it, the team loses the ability to notice when the strategy no longer fits the world it was built for. Not dramatically, just gradually, until the gap between what the plan assumed and what's actually happening becomes too wide to ignore. And by then, changing course is expensive, disruptive, and late. The assumptions conversation changes that. Take your current strategy, the actual plan your organization is operating against right now, and ask out loud, what does this assume about the future? Most leadership teams have a strategy that looks something like this. Grow revenue by X% over 3 years. Expand into 1 or 2 new segments. Invest in a set of internal capabilities to get there. Defend the core business while you do it. It's on a slide somewhere. Everyone's broadly aligned on it. And it feels solid because a lot of smart people spent a lot of time building it. But underneath that strategy is a stack of assumptions that nobody has written down. Things like, our core market stays stable enough to fund the growth investments. The customer behavior our revenue model is built on doesn't shift materially. The 2 or 3 capabilities we're investing in will actually be differentiating in 3 years, not commoditized. Our main competitors don't make a move that forces us to change direction mid-execution. And the reason people choose us today is the reason they'll choose us tomorrow. None of those are facts. They're all assumptions. And there's an important difference between the two. A fact is something you can verify. An assumption is something you're staking your plan on without being able to verify it, because it's about the future, and the future hasn't happened yet. Every strategy, without exception, is built on assumptions. And that's not a criticism. That's just what strategy is. The problem isn't that the assumptions exist. The problem is that most organizations treat them as facts. The assumptions get buried under execution, and the moment that happens, the organization loses its ability to notice when an assumption is turning bad. If you've staked your 3-year plan on the assumption that your core market stays stable, and the signals that it isn't are starting to appear, you need to know that early, when you still have room to respond. But if nobody is actively treating that assumption as something that needs watching, those signals will get ignored, explained away, or simply never reach the people who need to act on them. Not because anyone is being careless, because the plan said it was a fact, so nobody was looking. The assumptions conversation changes that. Take the strategy and ask, what has to be true for this to work? Write every answer on the whiteboard. You'll get 5 or 6 quickly, but push to keep going. There is usually 12 to 15 if you're really honest. Which of these are we most confident about? And which one, if it turned out to be wrong, would most damage our strategy? Those questions always produce a long silence, because when people are forced to say it out loud, they know. In a typical 3-year growth strategy, it's usually the assumption that the core business stays healthy long enough to fund the transformation, or that customers will adopt the new offering at the rate the model requires. The thing everyone privately worries about, but nobody has put on the table. You don't need to resolve anything in that session. You don't need to rewrite the strategy. Just naming assumptions out loud changes how your team holds the strategy, from executing with false certainty to executing with clear eyes. And that shift, once it's in the room, tends to stay there. Month 1 changed how your team thinks. Quarter 1 is where that thinking has to show up in what you actually do, visibly, in ways others can see and point to. But most teams get here in stall. The conversations were good, the assumptions session was uncomfortable but in the right way, and then execution takes over, the business as usual takes over. The horizon shrinks back to this quarter, and 3 months later, nothing looks different from the outside. By the end of your first quarter, you want future-ready thinking to have left a visible mark on how your team operates. Not a transformation, a footprint. Something you can point to and say, we think differently than we did 3 months ago. At some point, you will probably hit a moment of resistance. A senior stakeholder who thinks this is way too abstract. A quarter where the pressure to deliver makes long horizon thinking feel like a luxury. A week where you simply don't protect the thinking time and the habit slips. When that happens, and it will, so when that happens, remember this. That moment is not a sign that this isn't working. It's a sign that it is. Because you're now leading in a way that creates a little productive friction with the status quo. The leaders who built genuinely future-ready cultures are almost always the ones who kept going at exactly that moment. So keep going. The first thing to do this quarter is to take your most uncomfortable assumption and work through what you'd actually do if it turned out to be false. You've probably identified 1 or 2 that nobody is fully comfortable with, but nobody has properly addressed either. What if the core market doesn't stay stable long enough to fund the transformation? What if customers don't adopt the new offering at the rate the model requires? Walk it forward. Don't just name the risk. Work through the response. What would you stop? What would you start? Where would you redirect? The teams that do this don't just make better contingency plans. They start to hold their strategy differently, with more honesty, more flexibility, and a lot less false certainty. And something else happens too. The people in the room stop waiting to be told what the future holds, and start taking responsibility for thinking about it. The second thing happens in ordinary time, and that distinction matters. The next time a meaningful decision lands on your plate, a budget call, a restructure, a new initiative, a supplier contract, before the room moves to evaluation, ask out loud, what will the right answer to this look like in 3 to 5 years? Not just right now. Let the team sit with it. 5 minutes is enough. You're not adding a strategy process to every decision. You're adding a question. And that question asked in an ordinary meeting sends a signal. This isn't a special occasion. This is just how we think now. When they see you pulling the frame forward in a budget meeting, in a supplier conversation, in a Tuesday afternoon call that nobody would call strategic, that's when the behavior starts to spread in your team. Do it once deliberately, then do it again. That repetition is the footprint. The third thing to do is to celebrate one good question publicly. The next time someone in your team raises a genuinely long horizon question, something that isn't about this quarter, something that shows they're thinking ahead, name it out loud in front of others. You don't need a speech. Something as simple as, that's exactly the kind of question I want us asking more of. 5 seconds. But those 5 seconds do something that no strategy offsite can replicate. They show everyone in the room what good looks like. The person who asked the question feels seen. The people who heard you say it recalibrate what's worth raising. Culture doesn't shift through strategy decks. It shifts through moments like that one. Small, specific, repeated. You can close this video, go back to your inbox, and nothing changes. Next Monday looks like last Monday. The strategic work stays untouched, and slowly, without you deciding it, the gap between the leader you are and the leader you intended to be gets wider. Not dramatically, just gradually, until one day you realize you're not frustrated anymore, you're just tired. That's what staying reactive costs. Not in a week, but over years. If you want to make this shift and you want support doing it, I work directly with senior leaders on exactly this transition. Not theory, not a course you'll never finish, a real conversation about where you are, where you want to be, and what's actually in the way. The link to book a call is in the description. It's free, and it's the most useful 45 minutes you'll spend this month.